I have Harry.
Prince?
He doesn't like the look of cats. He barks at them, so they don't come.
So you're not a cat person? Oh, gosh. Cats are a listed pest, says someone. Why should people have to spend money or go to exorbitant lengths to keep other people's pests out of their property? Borrow a cat cage from your local council. Now, that is going to bring a bit of feedback. That's a bit unfair, isn't it? Because as, on a more serious note, as Anne says, cats are hugely popular and they're our friend.
I wouldn't say they're the most... I think dog is man's best friend, to be fair.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't think cats are. But still, look, I don't dislike cats. I just don't have any because Soggy Plum and Raisin wouldn't want to play with them.
No.
So, yeah, but you can't be doing cruel things to cats.
Of course not.
So but having a dog is the best deterrent on the planet.
Keep it to the vinegar and the lemon peel in the garden. That was a nice one, wasn't it, Mike? Yeah.
Who's got time to do all that?
Well,
though,
that's the other thing, isn't it? Yeah.
You know.
No, none of us are here cat people, but I'm sure there would be many listening. As Mike did, I got my licence as soon as I turned 15. Had to go into Timaru from the South Canterbury High Country. Had previously passed the theory, so got in the car with the cop. He explained the practical and we set off. 5 minutes into the test at the intersection of Trafalgar and Church Streets, he turned and said, "You've been driving for a while?" I said, "Yes, since I was 7. He replied, "Take me back." Very good. So that's us for the show. Mike and Julia, I really appreciate your time. Anything else to add? Any advice about those young people there wanting to get their first licence as we have 30 seconds up our sleeve?
Well, I think we need to focus on the review of licensing. And can I just say that I've been interfacing with the minister who was in charge of licensing, and that was the Green Minister, Julianne Genter, and she was right across it. She's a real loss to the government.
Mike Williams, Julia Hartley-Moore, thank you so much for the panel. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
I'm back tomorrow, Thursday, 3:45. Checkpoint is next. Bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Akine, the West Indies cricket team is caught crossing the boundary when it comes to isolation rules. The Director General of Health joins us live. A dying woman begs for her sister to get a spot in managed isolation on emergency grounds, with MIQ maxed out for Christmas. An animal welfare group says it was forced to take a private prosecution over rodeo cruelty because a government ministry wouldn't. Fresh abuse allegations surface against the late Peter Ellis as an appeal against his convictions continues beyond the grave. The Māori Party is asking for a recount in 2 electorates. And does Donald Trump's to-do list include pardoning himself? And can he actually do that?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. The West Indies cricket boss is backing the punishment handed out to the visiting team after breaching managed isolation rules in Christchurch. The Ministry of Health has revoked the players' exemption to train together for the rest of their stay in quarantine after some socialised and shared food outside of their designated bubbles. Johnny Grave says they're not taking the matter lightly.
It's fair to say that we are extremely disappointed that some of the players seem to have interacted with other members of their respective bubbles. We're certainly in full support of the action taken by the New Zealand Ministry of Health.
Johnny Graves says if today's round of COVID testing comes back negative tomorrow, the West Indies tourists will leave managed isolation as scheduled on Friday. More homes in Napier have been declared uninhabitable following Monday's devastating storm. Hawke's Bay Civil Defence says as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, 225 homes have been assessed and 30 are not fit to live in. 11 homes on Napier Hill are severely damaged, as are 2 in the suburb of Māori. Affected residents are evacuating to welfare centres set up in Napier and Hastings, all to friends and family. Welfare checks and safety assessments continue. The Real Estate Institute is urging the Reserve Bank not to make lending harder for first home buyers. It says property investors should wear any tighter regulations more than those looking for their first home. The central bank is looking at reinstating loan-to-value ratio restrictions from March next year. The chief executive of the Real Estate Institute, Bindi Norwell, hopes the bank might be able to treat first home buyers differently.
We'd like to see first home buyers not have such a high LVR, that's for sure, or any LVR. But, I can understand why, they're looking closely at investors at the moment in terms of the LVR restrictions. I mean, we have seen a housing market that is, very buoyant right now. Prices have been increasing significantly.
The central bank has held its cash rate at 0.25% and will keep buying government bonds to keep interest rates low. Auckland Council's budget blowout could more than double to $1 billion by 2024. Councillors have received a damning new forecast based on the assumption borders will be shut for another 2 years. Jean Bell reports.
COVID-19 has already shot a $450 million hole through the council's finances, but a new forecast suggests that this could grow by a further $540 million over the next 3 years. Mayor Phil Goff says about 60% of the council's income comes from sources other than rates. This includes dividends from Auckland Airport shares, operations at Ports of Auckland, concerts and visitor attractions. Mr Goff says these sources have all taken a big hit with both the border closures and the lockdowns. Ko Jean Bell, TNA.
Judith Collins has shaken up her caucus, rocketing a little-known MP up the ranks into a plumb new finance position. The dramatic promotion has already caused some wrinkles, with Simon Bridges turning down a role in response. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
It's all coming up. Andrew Bailey, the Port Waikato MP, has shot up the ranks this year. He was number 32 under Simon Bridges. He's now number 3. Judith Collins has given him a whole new role, Shadow Treasurer, to work alongside Michael Woodhouse in finance. It's understood Mr Bridges was offered finance, but turned it down due to the split in responsibilities. Both he and Todd Muller, another former leader, have been demoted, down 3 and 13 spots respectively. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. New Zealand Rugby says it's unacceptable that some All Blacks continue to fail to wear mouthguards. Each team received a red card during the match for high tackles, as World Rugby seeks to decrease the number of head injuries in the game and improve player welfare. Mouthguards can help reduce head injury, and while wearing one isn't compulsory under World Rugby rules, it's part of New Zealand players' contract agreements. And the NZR's Chris Lendrum says their actions are incredibly disappointing.
Damage revealed.
We expect our professional players to set a standard and role model for all of our players in the community and their whānau. We've obviously already raised this issue in recent times, and so we'll do it again, and we'll have to do that pretty seriously if we've got repeat offenders.
NZR's Chris Lendrum. Queensland captain Daly Cherry Evans is adamant his team must improve if they're to seal the State of Origin Rugby League series in Sydney tonight. The Maroons head into Game 2 with a 1-0 series lead after an upset win over the Blues in Adelaide last week. But Cherry Evans doesn't have to look back far. To no victory in the opening match of an Origin campaign is no guarantee of series success. Last year, the Maroons won the opener in Brisbane, only to be humiliated by the Blues in Perth. Spanish golfer John Rahm has hit a hole-in-one for the second day in a row during a practice round at Augusta for the Masters, which starts on Friday. That's the news.
Damage revealed.
The lady was obviously in shock when we got her out. It was a fairly full house and they were all bloody lucky.
We rushed around, stressed, trying to get everything, put everything in rubbish bags, chucked in the truck.
The big tree's fallen down, and it's obviously a massive force because it drove a brand new Santa Fe, which then catapulted a brand new Isuzu D-Max through a big concrete wall.
I was knee-deep in water on the backfield. I walked around and it seriously looked like a river flowing through the school.
Daily breaking news. Morning report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, Waikato, Waitomo and Taupo. Scattered showers, some heavy until evening, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Showers, some heavy, possibly thundery, then clearing overnight and becoming fine. Taranaki to Wellington, Taumaranui and Taihape also wided upper. Cloudy periods with isolated showers clearing this evening, fine tomorrow, apart from areas of morning and evening cloud. Marlborough and Nelson, cloudy periods and isolated showers, clearing and becoming fine tomorrow morning. Bulletu Fiordland, fine tonight, mostly cloudy tomorrow, isolated showers in Westland. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine apart from areas of cloud or fog, morning and night. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. RNZ National, it's 6.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, the touring West Indies cricket team has had its special privileges revoked after breaking the rules in managed isolation in Christchurch. Team members have been caught mingling in the hallways and sharing food. They'll now be confined to their rooms until their 2 weeks is up on Friday. The Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, will join us live shortly. But first, a Wairarapa woman who is dying from brain cancer is begging the government to make an exception to get her UK-based sister home. With managed isolation filled to capacity, the only option for Kiwis overseas is to get an emergency spot in managed isolation, which is hard to come by. Of the more than 8,000 applications that have been made for emergency allocations, only 15 have been granted. But as thousands of New Zealanders fly back for a Christmas break, there are calls for a priority system to be established for those in more desperate situations. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Anne Myers may not live to see another Christmas. The 59-year-old South Wairarapa woman has brain cancer and the prognosis isn't good.
My sister and I, within 2 years, were both diagnosed with the BRCA gene, which meant we've had to have double mastectomies, we've had to have ovaries removed, we've done the chemotherapy, we've done the radiotherapy, etc., etc. And then about 5 months ago, I found out that it had re-metastasised into my brain. I did a brutal radiation that nearly killed me, only to find that the cancer had re-metastasised in my brain and that I was given months to live. And that was only, 3 weeks ago, Claire?
Anne is declining rapidly. Having celebrated her niece's 21st just weeks ago, she's now on morphine every night. She's desperate to see her younger sister, who lives in the UK with her husband and children. But with managed isolation full up, their only option is an emergency allocation, something they've been declined.
They're fighting as hard as they can in the UK to get out here because this is, I'm dying. And not sort of trying to make a meal out of it, but when I hear that the West Indian cricketers can be wandering around, just enjoying themselves, flouting the laws, when there's people like myself out there, and I'm not just including myself, anybody else that's in this position, it's just not right. It's just not fair.
Anne's family isn't asking for any exemptions from the quarantine process when they get here, and they haven't bothered booking for the January spots available because it may be too late. Anne says the process seems unnecessarily cruel.
I don't really have time, and all I want is to see my sister, for us to be together. I don't think it's too much to ask as we were at now. And at this point, I don't know if I'm going to even get to see her, which is heartbreaking. And I mean that brothers as well.
The government has not allocated a specific number of rooms for emergency applications and says there are very restrictive criteria around them. No one from managed isolation and quarantine would be interviewed, but in a statement said,
"You can apply for an emergency allocation if you're a New Zealand citizen or resident class visa holder without a voucher who has an imminent threat to your life or serious risk to your health, which requires urgent travel to New Zealand."
The emergency application process has been in place since Friday the 30th of October, and by November 6th there had been 885 requests. Just 15 have been approved. Anne isn't the only one struggling with the system. Holly Tasker lives in Paris and is urgently trying to get home after losing her job. She booked her flight months ago and has been trying to secure a spot in managed isolation every day since the vouchers became available, but with no luck.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of stuff in the media about people, to be honest, in worse situations than I am. But then I've seen also, on the other hand, I've seen people that have lost their jobs quite recently in the second lockdown who've booked well after I have that have been given places. So I don't understand, why is there no order of priority? Why is there no, for people that have booked in advance and people that are in, slightly more desperate situations? It's not a holiday for me. I want to be home.
Brent Thomas of House of Travel says the demand is huge and the heartbreak is real.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. There's certainly been people who have had family issues or tragedies which they want to get back for. Obviously, the most obvious one of that is if there has been a death of a close relative and wanting to get back for the services that those people might be having with their family. And it's obviously a very stressful time at the best of times, and the complexities of getting some vacancy where there's very limited spaces available just adds to that pressure and anxiety around it.
For now, Anne Myers isn't giving up hope and is begging for some compassion and closure.
I'm a very proud New Zealander in everything we've achieved, but I just feel we've been horribly let down for those of who really need this now. Not just jaunting home for a holiday because you can. It's not about that at all.
For Checkpoint, Cornita Blake-Persona-Ho.
More homes in Napier have been declared uninhabitable following Monday's devastating storm. Hawke's Bay Civil Defence says as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, 225 homes have been assessed and 30 are not fit to live in. 11 homes on Napier Hill are severely damaged, as are 2 in the suburb of Mariwa. Affected residents are evacuating to welfare centres set up in Napier and Hastings, or to friends and family. Our reporter Anusha Bradley and camera operator Dom Thomas are in Napier and filed this report.
This is the first time Tracy Tasseback has returned to her Mariwa home on Barker Road after Monday's storm.
Oh my God. I'm in shock a bit. I didn't expect it to be this messy. Yeah, this was all stacked very nicely. This is all household stuff that's been stacked up. Yeah, I've got a mobility scooter in there. We've got all our camping gear, personal family photos.
The knee-deep water entered her front and back door, while the rain poured through her ceiling. Her car has also been damaged.
So luckily I do have insurance. People at the back, the flatmates, their cars are going to be towed away and they've got no insurance. The lady has house insurance, but she's in Auckland at the moment. And her house is way worse than mine.
Barker Road is one of the lowest lying streets in Napier, and the water here is still ankle deep. Another resident, Shannon Mackay, describes the moment her neighbours had to be evacuated from the floodwaters on Monday night.
I think it was 10, 11 o'clock at night. Next thing we hear our neighbour going, "Ciao!" And we're like, "We're all right, neighbour." And he was like, "Nah." And then, just out of nowhere, the army truck came along and was looking for our back neighbour, but our back neighbour ended up getting themselves evacuated. But they were flooded, they were on their barbecue table waiting.
While the knee-deep water came up to just below her doorstep, she's anxious about forecasts of more rain tonight.
Yeah, because we might have another one like this, but might be 10 times worse.
In nearby Nuffield Avenue, Mihi and David Aliff are enjoying a new lake view from their upstairs balcony over what used to be Whitmore Park. But downstairs is a different matter.
So we were walking in ankle-deep water throughout the whole of the bottom of the house.
And it's still very soggy, your carpet, and it does smell damp.
It is. It is. All the rooms are the same, every room downstairs.
All their belongings here are water damaged.
All the books on the shelves are obviously damaged. All our musical gear, guitars and amps and everything are water damaged. We've got a lot of photos and, sentimental things that's got no value on those, yeah.
The clean-up also continues in Napier's CBD. The owner of Music Machine on Hastings Street, Richard Jackman, is counting his losses after dozens of instruments and gear were damaged by water pouring in through his roof.
Retail, we sat down and worked out everything that's been damaged, about 70,000. So at retail price, which is pretty well about a big amount of our stock, basically. Probably about a third of our stock got damaged.
It couldn't have come at a worse time, with Christmas only around the corner and new stock hard to find.
Normally it wouldn't be a problem, but unfortunately with COVID, a lot of the stuff, we're having terrible problem with supplies. That's actually, apart from the mess and the cleaning up and all the claiming, the hardest part is some of the stuff we won't be able to replace, which we'll just have to suck it in and get on with it, I suppose.
Tracy Tassevac, who is on a benefit, is also counting the cost.
Just finding the money for the excess for insurance is going to be a job for both my vehicle and the contents in the house.
The government's announced it's putting $100,000 into the Napier Mayoral Relief Fund to help people like Ms Tassevac get back on their feet. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
And if you were listening to that, do have a look at Anusha's piece, which we'll put up on our Facebook page. You can see the video. Peter Ellis's bid to overturn 13 remaining convictions for child sex offences has hit a speed bump after fresh allegations. The former Christchurch civic creche worker died in September last year. However, the Supreme Court has ruled his appeal can continue. A hearing was held at the court today where it was revealed a woman had complained about being sexually abused by Ellis in 1982. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
Peter Ellis always maintained his innocence after being found guilty of 16 counts of sexual abuse in 1993. He appealed twice to the Court of Appeal. The first appeal quashed 3 of the convictions, while the second appeal against the 13 remaining convictions was dismissed in 1999. The Supreme Court has ruled his appeal can proceed despite his death. Certain suppression orders are in place following today's hearing, but what we can report is that a woman came forward and complained to the police in February last year. No formal investigation was launched, and the Crown was only alerted about the complaint in September last year. Peter Ellis had no opportunity to respond to the allegations when he was alive. The woman's complaint was backed up by her sister. A Crown lawyer, John Billington QC, says that evidence has been sworn to. He took responsibility for the delays.
This evidence, if it was thought to be credible, goes to the very same issue of memory. Now, I accept that as I stand here today, more could have been done to satisfy this court of the veracity of it or the truth of it. It hasn't been done.
The court heard the woman first complain to the police in the early 90s about Ellis sexually abusing her about a decade earlier. Peter Ellis's defence lawyer, Robert Harrison, told the court there is no record of that complaint. He described that as a red flag.
I cannot believe that a complainant would have walked into a police station in Christchurch in 1992 or 93 complaining about Peter Ellis sexually abusing them and something not happening.
He says the evidence revealed today has no reliability and is concerned about its credibility. Justice Williams says further work needs to be done to investigate the complaint, including by the police and the Crown. The hearing was adjourned. The Crown has been asked to provide an update on its inquiries by the end of the month. No date has yet been set for when Peter Ellis's appeal will take place. For Checkpoint, called Jonathan Mitchell.
The house price boom caught the Reserve Bank off guard, forcing it to consider bringing back loan-to-value ratio restrictions on lending. That's the opinion of one economist as the RBNZ signals the restrictions they promised to remove for a year in May will likely be reintroduced in March. Andrew McRae reports.
It was meant to make getting on the property ladder easier for those with smaller deposits, allowing the banks to lend them more. Elizabeth hoped to take advantage and buy her first home in Auckland, but it's not been the reality.
So you kind of get in the room and, you think you have a shot, you got all the approvals from everyone that you need, and you're kind of excited and ready to buy, to buy your first home. And then you get in there, and a lot of the time in the auctions that we've gone to, there have been developers, and they just have so much more money than what we have.
The Reserve Bank says since the restrictions were removed in May, the lending market's improved and there's been rapid growth in high-risk investor lending. Westpac's chief economist, Dominic Stevens, says the central bank had to reduce interest rates to prevent inflation getting too low. But that sparked a house price boom, which in turn is a threat to financial stability.
They will be aiming to try to direct more of the impact of low interest rates at businesses rather than at housing.
He believes the RBNZ has been caught completely off guard.
They were forecasting negative 7% house price inflation for the year ended December 2020. I think the latest data is clearly showing that we're going to get something more like positive 9. So they've had a 16 percentage point surprise on their house price forecast. As I say, they've been caught completely unaware by the turnaround in the housing market, and they're scrambling to catch up.
Senior property economist at CoreLogic, Kelvin Davidson, says investors have been more active in the market over the last few months.
Perhaps that group who were previously just locked out by the 30% deposit requirement, they've now been able to buy in this window of opportunity, if you like, when they've only needed a 20% deposit. And I guess there's just a feeling just in recent weeks that lending might have started to get a little bit too hot.
While the change won't directly impact first-home buyers, as they'll still need a 20% deposit to get a mortgage, he thinks it could indirectly create opportunities for them.
So I don't think it's necessarily clear that would-be first-home buyers have been blocked out by investors. I think both groups have been pretty active, but at the margins it could create just a few more opportunities for first-home buyers to get in without that really strong investment demand that has been there.
Westpac's Dominic Stevens expects any LVR restrictions will be squarely aimed at investors and not first-home buyers.
First of all, it's politically very difficult to get in the way of first home buyers' ability to get into the market. Secondly, there's actually pretty reasonable evidence suggesting that of all of the various LVR restrictions they used last decade, the most effective were the ones targeted at investors. So I absolutely think this is going to be targeted at investor lending.
Elizabeth just hopes removing some speculators from the property market will help.
My feeling is maybe the Reserve Bank went a little too hard on reducing the interest rates too quickly. I think it has had a really big impact in inflating asset prices for people who are already well off. The fallout of that is on people who don't own these assets, finding it really, really tough to get a foot in the door.
The Reserve Bank says it will consult on the changes before making a final decision. But CoreLogic's Kelvin Davidson says the bank's clearly signalling it will follow through. For Checkpoint, Core Andrew McRae-Tene.
It is 23 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. Let us know whether you think there should be a priority list for people wanting places in isolation to get vouchers to come home. Should families with emergencies be placed ahead of people who are coming back for holidays? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The touring West Indies cricket squad will be banned from training and confined to their hotel rooms after breaching the managed isolation rules on several occasions. CCTV captured team members sharing meals and mingling in groups at their Christchurch hotel. The West Indies players had special rules for their isolation period, meaning they can train together in bubbles. West Indies cricket boss Johnny Graves says he was woken up by a phone call informing him of the news.
So the information that we've been told thus far is that there were a few incidents involving a mixing between those two bubbles. There's no evidence at this stage that any members of the touring party left the facility or that any unauthorised person accessed it, or that any members of our touring party interacted with anyone who may be at that managed isolation facility outside of obviously support staff and medical practitioners from the New Zealand authorities that are managing the facility.
Johnny Graves says he's extremely disappointed players broke the rules and says it will be a huge blow to their preparation. Well, joining us now is the Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. Kia ora, Dr. Bloomfield. Can you tell us what exactly these players were doing that they weren't supposed to?
Kia ora. Yes, I can. And the main thing was, as described there by Johnny Graves, that they were essentially gathering together inside the facility outside of their rooms in groups, so in the corridor, sharing food, sitting around chatting, clearly not abiding by the obligations and expectations that they were only well too aware of. And this was captured on CCTV. It was responded to by staff immediately, and the facility have done a fantastic job. They were given a reminder, a very clear reminder about what was expected, and then we saw once again actually they were at least one or two of them were then continuing to do that. And the investigation showed that actually there had been other occasions where this had been happening. So that was what we were responding to very forthrightly.
So when you say they were basically mingling together, socialising, how long were they doing it for? I mean, the period of time that they were together mixing.
Well, just to point out, of course, that they do have this privilege of being able to train together inside their separate bubbles as part of the arrangements, and so they go off to training grounds. There's very strict arrangements that they had signed up to. But this was really just gathering together in the corridor outside of their rooms for a period of time. I don't know the exact period of time, but as soon as this was found and observed by the staff in the facility, they took immediate appropriate action, and the players then returned to their own rooms. But we did see once again at least one or two of them coming back out and trying to do the same thing, and that was what we responded to.
So they ignored instructions after being told that they were breaking the rules?
They did, and I mean, Johnny Grave may be disappointed. I was more surprised than anything because they clearly knew what the expectations were. They had signed up to this before the tour. They understood what those obligations were, and my understanding is they've done a tour of the UK earlier in the year, so had already been through this experience. So, look, I'm really surprised that they did breach the protocols and the expectations, and that's why we took pretty immediate action. How
many times were they warned?
Well, the warning came after the CCTV footage was observed by staff. They went and spoke with them, but it was then the staff went back and had a look at some of the previous CCTV footage and found some other occasions, and so therefore, immediate action was taken.
On what day of isolation was it first seen that they were mingling outside of the rules?
Well, we were notified by the staff at the facility yesterday, which was day 11 of their stay, and that was in the morning we found out about it. They were immediately all required to go to their own rooms and to stay there, so effectively a lockdown, and that's when we did a further investigation. And I don't know the details, but my managed isolation facility colleagues have told me that there were other breaches identified, and so that's why we...
Do you know on what days of isolation the earlier breaches occurred?
No, I don't, but certainly the first day that they were brought to our attention was yesterday, and that's when we acted.
Okay, so what's the punishment? You get sent to your room?
Well, no, a little more than that, actually. I should say, of course, that all members of the party have had tests and all have returned negative tests.
But that's not the point, is it, Dr. Bloomfield? With the greatest respect, that is not the point. They broke the rules and they got sent to their rooms.
Yeah, if you can let me finish, what the action we did take was we immediately rescinded last night I wrote to them and rescinded their privilege around getting together and training. They were due to go training again today and tomorrow. They're no longer allowed to train together. They are all required to remain in their rooms, and the decision about when they are released will be with the Medical Officer of Health, who determines if they meet low-risk indicators. And I also we've indicated to their governing body, West Indies Cricket, that we expect them to also look very carefully at what's happened and to take appropriate disciplinary action.
So different bubbles were mixing, basically, when they shouldn't have been, right? That's a fair summary of it?
Correct.
So then why should they get out of isolation on day 14? If you've cross-contaminated bubbles, shouldn't they start from the beginning again?
Well, that'll be up to the Medical Officer of Health, and I just go back to the comment I made earlier that they've all tested negative twice. They were retested today, and the Medical Officer of Health, and I'm sure that discussed that with our Director of Public Health as well, will make the decision about whether we think it is safe for them to leave managed isolation and who will be able to leave managed isolation. And we have indicated that it may be necessary for them to stay longer. We won't hesitate to do that if we think there's any risk to the public's health.
So they've only got 2 days left in there. Can't you tell already whether you require them to stay on longer?
Well, we'll wait till we get the results of their day 12 testing, which was done today. That will be helpful.
So in terms of that testing, if they all come back negative, are you just going to let them go on day 14 as per normal?
As I say, that's up to the local Medical Officer of Health and the health team there. I'm not going to speculate on what their decision will be.
So it will ride entirely on the medical evidence rather than, I suppose, extending a punishment to them?
Yeah, we won't use the managed isolation as a punishment. What has happened is that their privilege to train together has been withdrawn. They can no longer do that.
That's only for 2 days, though, isn't it? That seems pretty, well, it seems like a bit of a slap across the wrist with a wet bus ticket.
Well, and their own organisation will also, I'm sure, apply some disciplinary response. But again, managed isolation is not a punishment in and of itself. It is there to protect the public health, and we will make sure that the public health is protected.
But yes, it is there to protect the public health. Don't disagree with that. But they were given privileged preferential treatment and different exemptions. So not only were they privileged to be in the managed isolation because they're coming here for sport and they're visitors, they were given exemptions and they didn't honour those exemptions, did they? So can you understand how this might sting, this abuse of the rules might sting when people are queuing up to get into MIQ?
Oh, absolutely, and that's why we withdrew the privilege immediately, and that's why their own organisation is doing its own investigation, and I'm sure will also have its own response.
Do you think that's enough, just the 2 days without training?
Well, that was the privilege that we were in a position to withdraw. They're in managed isolation to protect the public health, and so we'll make sure that that's what the Medical Officer of Health will make the decision around their release, and then any further disciplinary action will be up to their governing body.
You said it was really clear, that the players were really clear about what the rules were. So I'm wondering, when they were first told that they were breaking the rules, how did they react?
Well, I wasn't there on the ground, but clearly they went back to their own rooms as requested by the staff there, who have done a fantastic job and right along have done so. But again, I am surprised here because they did know what the rules were and what the expectations were. So, surprised and yes, a bit like Johnny Gray from West Indies cricket, I'm a bit disappointed as well.
Just a bit disappointed?
Well, yeah, a bit disappointed, but more surprised than anything else, given that they have done this before. They should have known what the rules were. And also, this is an arrangement that we have had in place for other visiting teams, like the netball team from England. We've had the Australian rugby team here, and this is a good thing if we can make these arrangements work for us being able to watch sport here in New Zealand. So, the fact that they've decided to do this and potentially put the arrangement in jeopardy is just surprising and disappointing.
Do you have the power to send them home?
I don't have. Well, it's not. That wouldn't be my decision. That would be the decision of their governing body in discussion with Sport NZ. But our job is to, of course, run a safe managed isolation process to make sure that there's no risk to the public's health.
No, I mean in terms of, public health risk. If they haven't followed the rules, do you have any powers in your back pocket where you could send them home for failure to follow the direction of the Director-General of Health?
Well, I have some powers, or there are powers, actually. They're under the COVID-19 Act, and if an offence has been committed, there is the opportunity for imprisonment of up to 6 months or a fine of up to $4,000. I think we've taken proportionate and immediate action at the moment, and their own organisation will, I'm sure, have more to say on that matter too.
But just so I'm clear on it, could you send them home if you wanted to?
That's not within my purview.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Director-General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Judith Collins carves up the political portfolios, so who in National got the prime cuts? President Donald Trump's on his way out, but for now he still has the power. So what does he plan to do with it? And the Māori Party's asking for a recount in 2 electorates. And what's going into the archive to capture the year of COVID for future generations? We would love your feedback. Let us know what you reckon about the West Indies team here, breaking the rules in managed isolation. They've been sent to their rooms for 2 days, no training, but that is the punishment. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines with Susanna.
West Indies cricket boss Johnny Graves supports the Health Ministry punishing the visiting team for breaching managed isolation rules in Christchurch. The Ministry has revoked the players' exemption to train together while in quarantine after some socialised and shared food outside of their designated bubbles. A Wairarapa woman who is dying from cancer says a priority system is needed for New Zealanders urgently needing to come home. Anne Myers is begging the government to let her UK-based sister come home, but with managed isolation filled to capacity, she has been turned down. Of more than 800 applications made for emergency places, only 15 have been granted. A total of 30 homes in Napier have now been declared uninhabitable after Monday's devastating storm. Of those, 13 are severely damaged, mostly in or around Napier Hill. Hawke's Bay Civil Defence says welfare and safety checks are continuing. The Real Estate Institute is urging the Reserve Bank not to make lending harder for first home buyers and make investors wear any tighter regulations. The central bank is looking at reinstating loan-to-value ratio restrictions from March next year, but the Institute hopes the bank can be more flexible for first home buyers. National MP Andrew Bailey has shot up 14 spots in the party rankings to number 3, taking on the new role of Shadow Treasurer. Mr Bailey will work closely with Michael Woodhouse, who takes over the finance portfolio. Leader Judith Collins says the new two-person approach is loosely modelled on Australia's arrangement. Peter Ellis's legal team is questioning the reliability of fresh allegations against the convicted child sex offender. The Supreme Court has ruled an appeal against Ellis's remaining convictions can continue despite his death. A hearing today revealed a woman complained last year about being sexually abused by Ellis in 1982 and had also laid an earlier complaint with police. But defence lawyer Robert Harrison said there is no record of a complaint made by the woman in the early 90s. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time to get to the business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, let's start with the RBNZ. So they've unveiled the latest weapons against COVID. Fill us in. What's in the ammunition?
Yeah, so look, the LVR maybe stole this announcement's thunder today, but at its final monetary policy statement for the year, the RBNZ says its new funding for lending program will come into force next month. You're probably wondering what that is. Well, the scheme is where the central bank essentially loans money to the retail banks at the official cash rate, 0.25%, and this money is then there for the retail banks to go and lend to its customers. And the whole point of this is to keep a lid on those interest rates, ensure there's an adequate supply of credit throughout our financial system, and to empower banks to be bold in their lending and push back against those prevailing concerns in the economy. That is rising unemployment and falling inflation, those deflationary pressures. And the scheme itself, it's sort of relatively simple in terms of its conditions. The money will be available for banks to borrow for about 2 years, and they'll have to repay it after about 3. And interestingly, there are no real strict conditions that surround this program. There were calls from some bank economists for the Reserve Bank to put some specific incentives there for banks to lend to small businesses to really help stimulate the economy, but there is no mention of this here. The RBNZ says targeting specific sectors, that's for government to do. That's the role for them. It's not within its remit. It's of the mindset to really keep this scheme simple and trust the banks will choose how best to lend the money. So it does remain to be seen if we will send this money be lent to more and more for mortgages and that sort of thing, or banks could also just pocket the money and pay it back in 3 years' time. But in terms of the outlook for monetary policy here, it is worth mentioning that given that our economy has recovered better than expected from COVID-19 by all accounts, and we now have this new program. We do have the large scale asset purchase program, which is essentially money printing. There is a general view emerging here that we will not see. It's reduced the chances of a negative official cash rate. It just might not be needed at this stage, but we won't hear any more about that until next year when the Monetary Policy Committee meets again in February.
And what's the deal with Mainfreight? They're going great guns, are they? Yeah,
the country's largest transport company has delivered on its earlier guidance, and it has posted a mighty half-year profit, and this comes after a really slow start for the financial year for them. Its net profit, it was up by almost a quarter to $72.9 million. That was on the back of strong trading both in Australia and New Zealand. Revenue for the company, it hit $1.6 billion. It was up nearly 9%, and this was as its market share really grew in Australia, and also that's been benefiting from increasing consumer demand for products, which means more and more businesses are moving stuff around the world. And this is just, look, this company, it's been one of the stellar performers we've seen, New Zealand performers we've seen throughout the pandemic, and it just keeps on going. Yes, it's been disrupted by the impacts and global congestion, but it says it's been handling that pretty well. It says it's been talking to its customers, it's been advising them to make those orders way in advance and account for the fact that their items may be coming in late. Looking ahead, the company, it acknowledges the fact that because of such strong demand, it's actually had to go out and starting to buy more land and build more warehouses because its customers want space to keep their products. So on the back of this, though, surprisingly, quite a positive result. Its share price did slightly fall today, maybe hinting that investors didn't really see enough here from the company in terms of its outlook.
Okay, and what else has been going on the market?
Well, the NZX, it's closed up at another record high. It's up 53 points today at 12,665. Our dollar, it's up almost 1% to 68.8 US cents, 94 Australian and 51.9 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News. Nationals leader Judith Collins has unveiled her new lineup with some dramatic promotions and demotions. Her two predecessors, Simon Bridges and Todd Muller, have tumbled down the new caucus rankings. Simon Bridges now sits at number 7, down 3 spots, while Todd Muller drops to number 19, down 13 spots. RNZ understands there was some back and forth over the finance role, but Mr Bridges ended up with Justice and the new Water portfolio. Finance has been stripped from Paul Goldsmith and split into 2 roles to be shared by loyal Collins Lieutenant Andrew Bailey and MP Michael Woodhouse. Our political editor Jane Patterson filed this report.
I will be holding the portfolios of National Security and Intelligence, Pacific Peoples, and Technology, Manufacturing and Artificial Intelligence, which we will know obviously as AI.
The last time Judith Collins reshuffled the caucus, it was just after she took over as leader with more than 50 MPs. Now the jobs have to be shared out among 33.
This is not just about cauterising anything like that. What it is, this is the best team for the job and the job that we have to do now. I expect everybody has seen what happens when there is disunity. A whole lot of people lose their jobs.
Responsible for National's election economic plan and the fiscal hole, Paul Goldsmith has been stripped of finance and given education.
He is absolutely really keen to get into all of education in terms of the weeds of it.
The little-known Andrew Bailey shot up the party rankings to number 3, taking on the new role of Shadow Treasurer. It's the most dramatic promotion, up 14 spots. Mr Bailey will work closely with Michael Woodhouse, who takes over responsibility for the finance portfolio. Ms Collins says the new 2-person approach is loosely modelled on Australia's arrangement.
They are, I have to say, quite joined at the hip, get on really well, work really well together, and they will be a powerhouse, in my opinion.
RNZ understands Simon Bridges was offered the finance job but turned it down due to the split responsibilities, something Ms Collins was reluctant to discuss.
These are decisions that I make.
It means Shadow Treasurer Andrew Bailey will face off against the Finance Minister Grant Robertson in Parliament, something he says is just part of the job.
I have a background that I can certainly talk to him at a very specific level and detailed level. I think that's important as we go through, that we understand really what is happening from an economic perspective.
There was some speculation MPs like Chris Bishop and Nicola Willis might be punished for their role in the Muller coup. While Ms Willis slipped down the rankings a few places, she's been given the high-profile housing portfolio. Todd Muller himself drops 13 spots but keeps trade. Chris Bishop remains a senior MP as shadow leader of the House and going up against Labour's Chris Hipkins on the COVID response.
I'm going to be constructive yet critical and very much guided by the science and guided by the evidence.
High-profile newbie Christopher Luxon's been left near the bottom of the party rankings. He entered Parliament at the election and has been talked about as a future leader. Ms Collins says she intentionally left all 5 newcomers effectively unranked, but all have portfolios so they have something to get their teeth into. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Decency is basically the only handbrake on the powers of outgoing President Donald Trump, even though his days in the Oval Office are numbered. President-elect Joe Biden won't be sworn in till January, and Donald Trump is still refusing to accept the outcome of the election. He's already terminated his Secretary of Defense, and in the US, there's speculation he could use his presidential powers to pardon himself last minute. Professor Robert Yablin from the University of Wisconsin-Madison Law School explains how powerful Donald Trump still is.
Between now and January 20th, which is when the new president is inaugurated, the short answer is that the president has the same powers he has always had. Nothing significant changes just because this is now kind of this interim lame duck period.
So he can do whatever he likes?
Well, whatever he likes within the standard bounds of the U.S. Constitution and the law. But in terms of running the government, issuing executive orders, issuing pardons, any of that kind of thing, he can do the day after the election what he could do the day before the election.
So for us here in New Zealand, how powerful are executive orders?
Well, executive orders can be fairly significant. They, the president has quite a bit of leeway to act unilaterally. When we're creating law in the United States, Congress needs to be involved. But the president, kind of in the interstices of the law, can do a lot to direct how the government functions. He is the head of the executive branch, which employs hundreds of thousands of individuals, and he can direct policy within that branch through executive orders.
We have rules here in New Zealand, what we call caretaker conventions. So if it's clear who is in the next government, if there is a clear victory, until they swap over, the convention is that you don't undertake big new policy initiatives or you consult the incoming government. Do you have any element of that in the US?
Well, I would say we have two elements of it, one formal and one informal. The formal element is that by law in the United States, there is a presidential transition process. Now, the current president has to facilitate that process, and so far President Trump has refused to do so. But normally, as soon as the election is over, the incoming president will form a transition team. That transition team will have access to the existing government, and this is meant to facilitate a smooth transfer of power. So we do have that legal device. And then there are informal norms about what you would expect a president to do or not do in the final weeks of his presidency. And so you wouldn't expect a president to engage in any large-scale policy changes. You wouldn't expect a president to engage in, say, significant hiring or firing activity. But we already are seeing some of that on the part of President Trump. He fired his defense secretary, and I suspect that we will see more. Those norms are non-binding, and he has been a norm-breaking president.
So is he acting outside what you would consider to be decent?
Well, I don't know that I am the decency police, but I would say he is certainly acting outside what has been typical in previous administrations.
Could he, when you talked about pardons, can he pardon anyone wholesale? I mean, could he pardon himself for something?
So, there are a lot of U.S. legal experts who are debating that. And the reason that there is a debate is because it would be unprecedented for him to pardon himself. Because it's unprecedented, you can't point to the law that prevents it from happening. So the answer is he could try, and then we would have to see whether that would stick. There are limits to his pardon power. And so but whether he's trying to pardon himself or anyone else, the pardon power is a power to pardon for federal criminal activity. So he wouldn't be allowed to pardon himself or anyone else and prevent them from being prosecuted by state-level prosecutors in the U.S. And he wouldn't be able to pardon anyone and protect them from civil liability. So he himself would remain subject to civil liability after he leaves office.
If the convention is that the sitting president helps or facilitates the transition, if they don't do that, then, well, what redress is there?
Well, there's not much redress, except that, the Biden team could attempt to go to court and suggest that the president is not following the terms of this federal statute, the Presidential Transition Act. And I assume that the president's response would be, well, we haven't had you formally certified yet as the winner. So that's the one legal claim Biden can make. As a practical matter. What President-elect Biden is already doing is he is trying to form a transition team. He's conducting transition activities, even if he's going to be hamstrung by some extent by the Trump administration and maybe not allowed direct access to existing governmental operations.
So just to be clear, if someone is a bad loser and they start hiring and firing willy-nilly, if you're the new winner, you just got to stand by and suck it up until you're inaugurated.
I'm afraid that's right. And there are opportunities from day one when Biden takes office, he can attempt to undo executive orders that the president has issued. And he does have the power to do that. To the extent that the president has fired someone that he wants to rehire, he can attempt to do that. But the existing outgoing president, if that president is a sore loser, can be quite disruptive. And it does appear that this president is not going to do much to help facilitate a smooth transfer of power.
What's the worst the incumbent president could do?
Oh, I hate to contemplate the worst case scenario, but the president could engage in say mischief overseas, foreign policy actions, that sort of thing. Again, there would be nothing legally to stop the president, and foreign policy is an area where the president does have quite broad powers. So I don't have any specific scenario in mind, but that would be an area that you might want to watch out for if the president really was up to no good.
And that was Professor Robert Yablin. It is 9 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Māori Party has requested a recount in Tamaki Makaurau and Te Tai Hauauru, claiming discrimination prevented many Māori from voting. Its President Shea Wilson says he was bombarded with complaints, including election boos without Māori electorate papers. He says he wants to expose a voting system that treats Māori differently. Tianiwa Hurihanganui reports.
A recount is unlikely to change the election result in Tamaki Makaurau and Te Tai Hauauru, with both losing Māori Party candidates John Tamihere and Debbie Ngarua-Peka about 1,000 votes behind the winning Labour MPs. But Shea Wilson says he's not concerned about the final numbers. He simply wants to put a spotlight on what he says is the discrimination voters on the Māori roll face when they arrive at the election booth.
We've heard issues of people saying that they are in the Māori electorate, and when they get there, their names aren't on the list, and then they're forced to have to do a special vote for the general electorate. Specifically a case of a man who's in his 70s who's been on the Māori roll all his life and was told, no, you're now on the general roll.
The problems have been well documented. The Electoral Commission received 40 complaints about the experiences of Māori voters at the last election, holding a series of hui with Māori across the country in 2018 to see how services could be improved. Shea Wilson says they clearly haven't.
The treatment of Māori seats, where you always have to wait in line because there's more people servicing and looking after the general seats than there are those that look after the Māori seats. If we celebrate democracy, then we should be focusing in on it being everybody being treated the same.
Former Mana Party leader Hone Harawira is backing the Māori Party's plight for a fairer voting process, saying he's seen the problems Māori voters face time and time again. He requested a recount of his own for the same reasons following the 2014 election, after losing Te Tai Tokerau to Labour's Calvin Davis.
You go to a polling booth, some polling booths, they've got seats along the side for the general vote, but that's just for the generals. Where the Māoris go, no seating. It's hard to quantify when a Māori walks into a room and goes, oh shit, and just turns around and walks out. You can't measure that, but they do. They walk and they go, oh no.
Despite living in the far north, an area with a large Māori population, Mr Harawira says voters are still turning up at election booths without access to Māori voting papers. He says there's a simple solution.
No polling booth should be allowed to open unless it has the full complement of paperwork and speakers to handle the Māori roles.
The Māori Party currently have 2 MPs in Parliament, Rawiri Waititi, who won the Waiariki electorate, and Debbie Ngārua-Peka, who got in on the list. Recounts are led by a district court judge and usually take 3 to 5 days to complete. The Electoral Commission says it welcomes the opportunity to support a judicial recount in both electorates. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko te aniwa, Hurihanganui, ahau.
A mass brawl and numerous serious alcohol-related incidents in New Plymouth have been pinned on the city's alcohol control bylaw lapsing. Police learned the bylaw was unenforceable in March, but it expired nearly 2 years ago. Today, a senior New Plymouth Council officer has been taken to task over who's responsible for the blunder. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Today's extraordinary meeting to decide on whether to begin consultation on a new bylaw kicked off in a convivial enough manner, with Mayor Neil Holdham suggesting the Chamber debunk to the coastal walkway for a bevy or two.
Right, let's talk about popping bottles of champagne on the foreshore. Oh no, let's not. So, Mr. Dyer, welcome. Good sir.
But it wasn't long before veteran councillor Gordon Brown wanted Policy Development Lead Mitchell Dyer to spill the beans on who was actually responsible for the bungle.
Councillor Brown, followed by Councillor Dynovan.
Thank you, Worship. Mr. Dwyer, obviously someone didn't do their job properly. Was it you?
I don't think that in a learning environment we need to personalise that. The organisation has made an error. We've admitted that and we're just looking to solve it. We're not interested in witch hunts, and I won't allow a question like that in this chamber. We rise and fall together. Do you have a better question?
You know who it was?
For police, the lapse bylaw is no laughing matter. They say on the weekend of a huge brawl in July, 13 other arrests were made for disorder offences, including willful damage and assaults on police staff. They say since lockdown ended, there's been a noticeable increase in people drinking in cars and on the streets in the city centre. They say without the bylaw, policing has become more difficult and they want it reinstated. Councillor Colin Johnson also had a tough question for Mr Dyer.
Out at Uranui on the 31st of December 2019, this had lapsed. So all the people that brought alcohol to Uranui Domain, for instance, and got it taken off them, was that legal or not?
That had Mr Dyer walking on eggshells.
Through your worship, I'm going to answer that question carefully and state that the bylaw did not have any standing at that time. The legality of the approach or regulation of the officers, I'm not willing to answer.
Debate over, the councillors voted unanimously to put the previous bylaw with minor alterations out to the public for consultation. After the meeting, Councillor Brown had no regrets about taking Mr Dyer to task.
I think in an organisation this size, with the high degree of remuneration many of our officers get, that they should be accountable. And I hope that the person responsible is fully aware of that.
The Mayor Neil Holdham wasn't surprised to hear of a mass brawl in the city centre.
I mean, I grew up in this town and, you know, young men, they when they turn about 14 or 15, their brain chemistry changes and they pop out at about 26 and start thinking more clearly. And in that time we deal with a lot of damage, a lot of harm, damage to council assets, damage to our people, and so this is what the police deal with.
He wasn't sure what legal recourse people who'd fallen foul of the bylaw when it was unenforceable had.
Look, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm sure that if people feel aggrieved they can take legal advice, and everybody has a right to do that. I think our focus is to go out to the community, see what they want us to do. If the feedback is let's put these back in before Christmas, which I think it's likely, then we've just got to run a good process and then make that decision.
RNZ's questions to police about how many people were charged, fined or warned for being in breach of the bylaw while it was not enforceable are being treated as an Official Information Act request. Inquiries about whether charges or fines will be withdrawn or refunded are being treated as part of the same request. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Robin Martin ahau.
A lot of you are getting in touch about the West Indies cricket team that has, flouted the rules at managed isolation. They've been sent to their rooms for 2 days. Duncan says, for the life of me, I cannot see why we are allowing sports people to flout the rules while ignoring a humanitarian situation with people who are suffering from terminal illnesses. It boggles my mind, says Duncan. Someone else says, West Indies team, just send them home immediately. There are plenty of families separated by the restrictions on travel. Let's free these spots for people who truly need them and will behave accordingly. Another one says the idea of prioritising sports teams coming here makes me angry. Sports can wait.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Director-General of Health says the West Indies cricket team repeatedly flouted the rules while in managed isolation. The team has had its training privileges revoked for the rest of its stay in isolation after players were seen on CCTV socialising and sharing food outside their designated bubbles. Dr Ashley Bloomfield told Checkpoint the players were warned, but some ignored this, and an investigation found the players broke the rules on multiple occasions.
They clearly knew what the expectations were. They had signed up to this before the tour. They understood what those obligations were, and my understanding is they've done a tour of the UK earlier in the year, so had already been through this experience. So, look, I'm really surprised that they did breach the protocols and the expectations, and that's why we took pretty immediate action.
The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield. The West Indies cricket boss, Johnny Grave, believes there's a low risk the breaches have put their tour of New Zealand or the population in general in danger.
The players were tested 3 times before they left the Caribbean, all negative, and have already undertaken 2 negative tests since they've been in New Zealand, with a third one that was completed today with results tomorrow.
The West Indies cricket boss, Johnny Grave. A Wairarapa woman who's dying from cancer is begging the government to let her UK-based sister come home. With managed isolation filled to capacity, some New Zealanders overseas who need to return urgently are facing heartbreak. Of more than 800 applications made for emergency places, only 15 have been granted. Anne Myers is desperate to see her sister again, but her application has been declined.
They're fighting as hard as they can in the UK to get out here because this is, I'm dying and it's not sort of trying to make a meal out of it. But when I hear that the West Indian cricketers can be wandering around, just enjoying themselves, flouting the laws, when there's people like myself out there, and I'm not just including myself, anybody else that's in this position, it's just not right.
Anne Myers says there needs to be a priority system for people wanting to get back into the country. Homes on Napier Hill have borne most of the brunt of damage from Monday's storm. Hawke's Bay Civil Defence says 30 homes are now deemed uninhabitable and 13 of those are severely damaged. Anusha Bradley reports.
11 of the severely damaged homes are on or around Napier Hill, and the other 2 are in the low-lying suburb of Māori. Civil Defence Controller Ian MacDonald says it's too early to say how much it will cost to fix the damage. He says safety inspections of dozens more properties are likely to be completed tomorrow, and the longer-term challenge will be finding permanent accommodation for people currently in emergency accommodation. Meanwhile, social agencies are continuing welfare checks in the worst affected areas of Maraenui, Piramai and Marewa. Ko Anusha Bradley aho.
The little-known National MP Andrew Bailey has shot up the party rankings to number 3, taking on the new role of Shadow Treasurer. It's the most dramatic promotion in Judith Collins' new look lineup unveiled this afternoon, up 14 spots. Mr Bailey will work closely with Michael Woodhouse, who takes over responsibility for the finance portfolio. Ms Collins says the new 2-person approach is loosely modelled on Australia's arrangement.
They are, I have to say, quite joined at the hip, get on really well, work really well together, and they will be a powerhouse, in my opinion.
RNZ understands Simon Bridges was offered the finance job but turned it down due to the split responsibilities. A lawyer representing filmmakers Sir Peter Jackson and Dame Fran Walsh has urged Wellington City councillors not to allow a controversial proposed seaside development. Councillors are in a tense meeting deciding whether to proceed with the sale and lease of a couple of controversial pieces of land at Shelley Bay on Miramar Peninsula. A representative for the property developer Ian Castles, Earl Hope Pearson, told the council it had already committed to the deal. But lawyer Craig Stevens urged councillors not to be beguiled by that, arguing there is evidence that there is no deal. New Plymouth's mayor says he's not surprised mass brawls have taken place in the CBD since it became known a council bungle allowed its alcohol control bylaw to lapse. A local government act amendment in 2013 required all councils to review their liquor ban bylaws, and if they didn't, they automatically expired in December 2018, almost 2 years ago. Police say since becoming aware the bylaw was unenforceable in March, there have been 2 mass brawls and numerous other incidents in the city. Neil Holdham says young men are the problem.
When they turn about 14 or 15, their brain chemistry changes and they pop out at about 26 and start thinking more clearly. And in that time we deal with a lot of damage, a lot of harm.
Council voted today to begin consultation on reinstating the existing bylaw in time for Christmas. It's 5 minutes past 6. Queensland captain Daly Cherry Evans is adamant his team must improve if they are to seal the State of Origin Rugby League series in Sydney tonight. The Maroons head into Game 2 with a 1-0 series lead after an upset win over the Blues in Adelaide last week. But Cherry Evans doesn't have to look back too far to know victory in the opening match of an Origin campaign is no guarantee of series success. Last year the Maroons won the opener in Brisbane only to be humiliated by the Blues in Perth. World Rugby has postponed the European qualification tournament for next year's Women's World Cup indefinitely due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. Ireland, Italy, Scotland and another yet-to-be-decided European side were to contest the tournament, with the winner qualifying for next year's World Cup in New Zealand. The World Cup draw is due to be made in Auckland next week. Meanwhile, new Black Ferns captain Eloise Blackwell is confident they won't slip behind their Northern Hemisphere counterparts despite a lack of test play this year. There has been some Six Nations tests in Europe, but the Black Ferns will have to settle for matches against a New Zealand Barbarians side.
We've got the best players in the world here in New Zealand, and this is another opportunity to see the best players come Saturday and then following Saturday down in Nelson. So I think we're definitely on par, if not ahead of those girls up in Europe.
Eloise Blackwell. That's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Certainly nothing that I've ever experienced in my lifetime of living here in Napier.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
Douglas fir are a really bad one. They've recorded some seed travelling sort of 30, 40 kilometres in a good wind. Yeah, no, it's pretty ugly.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, Waikato, Waitomo and Taupo. Scattered showers, some heavy until tonight, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay showers, some heavy and possibly thundery, clearing overnight and becoming fine. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taumaranui and Taihape, also Wairarapa. Cloudy periods with isolated showers clearing tonight. Fine tomorrow, apart from areas of morning and evening cloud. Marlborough and Nelson, cloudy periods and isolated showers becoming fine tomorrow morning. For Buller through to Fiordland, fine tonight, mostly cloudy tomorrow with isolated showers in Westland. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine apart from areas of cloud or fog morning and night. And Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A northern farmer has been found guilty of mistreating rodeo animals after a group of lawyers was forced to take a private prosecution against him because the ministry wouldn't. Derek Robinson illegally used an electric cattle prodder on 2 collapsed distressed steers to force them out of a chute and into the arena for a roping competition at rodeos in Whangarei in 2016 and 2017. The New Zealand Animal Law Association says it took Robinson to court because even after a Ministry of Primary Industries inspector investigated and recommended Derek Robinson be prosecuted, the ministry just issued him with a warning letter. I asked association spokesperson Sar Cohen what Robinson did wrong.
When an animal is too distressed to be part of that form of entertainment, so they call it, the law requires the organisers to open the gate. In this case, what happened is instead of opening the gate, Mr. Robinson just took out his prodder and used it as a charged prodder. So he pushed the button and basically shocked these 2 animals to make them stand up. As soon as they stood up, Then the gate was open and they were thrown into the arena to be then pursued, chased by riders on horses. It happened on 2 separate events, one in 2016 and then another one in 2017 up north.
What do you think of how he behaved?
I think Mr. Robinson simply wasn't aware of the rodeo code. He's a very experienced farmer. He knows a lot about cattle, knows a lot about cows, and he probably behaved to them in the same way that he behaves on the farm. And what he failed to realize is that there are different rules in rodeo and that you can't do that. And in that particular situation, the gate had to be open and they had to be released.
Is it cruel to prod an animal when it is in that distressed state?
It is cruel, and from our perspective, it's illegal, which is the important point that we made in court.
This was a private prosecution. Why is that?
It all started in a checkpoint story some years ago where we heard about Mr. Robinson and his activities with his prodder. And at the time, the matter was referred to MPI for investigation, and we were very pleased to hear that MPI were investigating it. There was a very thorough investigation, and we've obtained the records of the investigation, and we were very impressed with the level of investigation that the MPI inspector exhibited. And then that inspector who investigated it recommended a prosecution. Something then went wrong within MPI, which we don't really know what, but when it went to a senior manager to basically approve the prosecution, that manager decided not to prosecute Mr. Robinson. Now, we saw that. We realized that Mr. Robinson offended at least twice, once in 2016 and then once in 2017, and we believed that he was going to do it again. And we thought he should be stopped. So as a matter of public interest, we thought he should be prosecuted. The problem of MPI having good evidence but refusing to prosecute is not new. This is something that we saw about 4 years ago when Michael Heron QC released his review into the fisheries prosecution, which is also MPI. And Heron QC criticised MPI back then in his report for having really good evidence but not prosecuting. So in the prosecutorial world, you need 2 tests before you file charges. The first one is the evidence, and the second is the public interest. And what the Heron report highlighted is there is a problem within MPI with understanding the public interest test. When is a matter important enough to be prosecuted in court? And we just looked at the investigation report, we looked at the recommendation to prosecute, and we simply couldn't understand why that manager in MPI decided to stop and not prosecute. And NZALA is a group of about 600 lawyers who love animals and love the law. And when something like this happens and everyone else fails to basically perform their duties, we do see ourselves as the last line of defence here, even though we have no powers to get evidence. But we do act through the court and through the legal system so that the animals' voices be heard.
But you shouldn't have to do that, though, should you, Sir? That's someone else's job.
Correct. Absolutely agree with that. And indeed, what we would like to do is to focus on educational activities and seminars, upskilling MPI, explaining to MPI their duties. Instead, we need to do prosecutions, which, like any other taxpayer, we expect MPI to do on our behalf. But,
so do you think the system is flawed currently as it stands?
The enforcement system?
Yes.
MPI have never, ever prosecuted a rodeo prosecution. Never. And that we think that created a sort of a false sense of immunity for the rodeo cowboys, because it was well known that MPI are interested in farmers and farms. And we asked the question, why shouldn't the cowboys have the same standard of enforcement as any farmer has? Why do we have one law, one rule for the farmers and one rule for the cowboys? There's definitely an issue there with regards to rodeo. I don't know why over 50 years they have never ever touched rodeos.
That was Sarah Cohen, and MPI provided Checkpoint this explanation as to why it did not prosecute the abuse. It says the ministry took various factors into account, including the degree of harm to the animals involved. It was decided it was not in the public interest to pursue a prosecution, and a formal warning was issued. Let's return to our earlier story on the West Indies cricket team in managed isolation they've been pinged for breaking the isolation rooms, sent to their rooms for 2 days. No more practice. They had special exemptions. New Zealand Cricket says they were made aware of the situation yesterday. In a statement, they say there's no evidence or suggestion that any members of the touring party left the facility or that any unauthorised persons accessed the facility. And it goes on to say that they are supportive of the Ministry of Health and Government position, and they'll continue working with the team to make sure there's no repeat of the violations. And they say the West Indies squad had their final COVID-19 test today, and results permitting are scheduled to leave managed isolation on Friday and to travel to Queenstown ahead of 2 matches against New Zealand A. Now, a lot of you have got in touch about this. You're not that impressed. Mike says, play beach cricket and let people in real pain and need come home. Another listener, Heather, says, I'm so angry that large numbers of Russian fishermen and sports people take up precious spots in our quarantine when individual New Zealanders in various situations can't get home. People are needing to come home to family, comfort and Christmas after losing jobs too. Bob says, as a cricket lover, can I suggest that they stay in their rooms for a fortnight? And another listener's got in touch to say, I would like to see the West Indies Cricket Association strip the players of their match fee and donate that money to New Zealand charities. And this one, it seems the isolation rule-breaking cricketers and fishers are more important than a family tragedy. Money before people once again. And another listener says, family emergencies should surely have priority over just a holiday. This is in relation to our earlier story also about the Wairarapa woman, Anne Myers, who has terminal brain cancer. She is desperate to get her sister home from overseas so they can see each other perhaps one last time. Her sister can't get a spot in managed isolation and quarantine, can't get an emergency exemption. It is full up over Christmas. Multiple mechanics say the bus involved in a fatal crash was mechanically sound and pointed towards driver error. The inquest into the death of 11-year-old Hannah Francis is into its 7th day. She died after a Ruapehu Alpine Lifts bus overturned on the way down the mountain in 2018. Jordan Bond reports.
It's been a major question of the inquest. Why would a bus with no mechanical faults and driven by an experienced driver suddenly lose its brakes and crash, killing a young girl? The central question comes down to whether the compressed air which powers the brakes ran out, and if so, why, leaving the bus to freewheel down the hill until it crashed. Experienced mechanic David Taylor looked at the bus after the crash. He's the second mechanic who found no mechanical issues.
When we subjected the bus to the brake test at BT&Z, the brakes worked perfectly satisfactory. All the steering joints were connected, the tyres, the suspension were all in good order.
Of the 31 people on board, 18 were injured, 3 seriously. The bus ended up on its side after careening down the hill and into a bank at an estimated 60 or 70 kilometres an hour. The driver gave evidence earlier, but cannot be named. No one was ever charged over the crash. Today, a heavy vehicle engineer for the New Zealand Transport Agency, Alexander Curry, outlined how using the foot brake too much could have drained the air from the system. He was asked questions by the lawyer Matthew Ferrier, acting for the bus operator, Ruapehu Alpine Lifts.
So too high a gear, meaning that the engine's not revving to drive the compressor?
Correct.
And the repeated or sustained application of the surface brake using up the air in the system?
Correct.
And because of the high gear, the compressor's not able to compensate?
Correct.
Mr Curry says there was clear photographic evidence that showed the foot brakes were used heavily instead of engine braking. He said the bus, a Mitsubishi Fuso, was appropriate and hasn't been involved in many crashes.
They're not overrepresented.
And in your view, designed to operate in all conditions?
Yes.
Including the conditions on the Oakuni Mountain Road?
Yes.
While questions around the cause of the crash and how future ones can be avoided are yet to be determined, how to improve safety during a crash also came up. David Bolt, councillor assisting the coroner, raised a common question, whether seatbelts should be compulsory on Alpine buses. He posed this to the Chief Executive of the Bus and Coach Association, Pim Boren.
My view would be that it would be vastly preferable for Alpine operators to have seatbelts and for passengers to be wearing them.
Dr Boren said there was some industry resistance to this idea because most buses do not have seatbelts and it would be economically challenging if changes came in quickly. The inquest in Auckland before Coroner Bridget Windley continues. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jordan Bond. Aho.
Wellington City Councillors are in a tense meeting to decide whether to proceed with the sale and lease of a couple of controversial pieces of land at Shelley Bay. They're discussing the future of the disused Air Force Base on Wellington's Miramar Peninsula, a development which would create 350 new homes. Catherine Hutton reports.
This is a story of two sides. In one corner sits the developer, in this case members of the Wellington iwi Taranaki Whānui and the property developer Ian Castles of the Wellington Company. Earl Hope Pearson spoke on behalf of Mr Castles and made it clear councillors should vote to sell and lease the land so the project can proceed. He told the meeting the Wellington Company's involvement began in 2015 at the request of Taranaki Whānui. It's been through the consent process twice and independent commissioners have reviewed it. He spoke of the development's benefits, including jobs, housing and more public spaces.
A development that will enhance Taranaki Whānui's footprint, a solution to Shelley Bay Tukuru, one that is real and it's not a dream, and there's been a lot of dreamers. Council, a deal is a deal.
In the other corner sit ratepayers, businesses, lawyers and members of Mo Whenua, a group of Taranaki Whānui who oppose the development. Lawyer Craig Stevens, who represents filmmakers Sir Peter Jackson and Dame Fran Walsh, took issue with Mr Hope Pearson's assertion a deal had been done and urged councillors not to be beguiled by that.
The Court of Appeal has recorded, and it's unchallenged, and it's set out there, it should also be recorded that no binding legal agreement has been entered into between the Council and the Wellington Company Limited. There is no deal.
The development is facing legal action from members of Mo Whenua. Haringi Jenkins-Mempin from the group urged the council to push pause until two court cases have been heard.
The first is Mo Whenua is engaged in a legal action in the High Court to recover our land at Shelley Bay. Our land was unlawfully taken, unlawfully sold and unlawfully purchased.
He says a judicial review has also been held to challenge aspects of the development, including information that was withheld or not disclosed during previous discussions. Mo Whenua member Dr Catherine Love told the council it should deal with Taranaki Whānui iwi members, saying there was no shortage of options who to engage with.
You deal with the breadth of the people, not one trust that is crippled at the moment anyway. There are long-standing landed trusts, mana whenua trusts, and I'm including the Wellington Tents, Palmerston North Reserves, Mo Whenua, marae communities.
On the wall, a red digital clock counts down from the 10 minutes submitters have to make their case. One submitter joked the only other place that has a flashing red clock is the US Supreme Court. But Dr Love left councillors in no doubt the importance of today's decision.
You face today your ihumātao moment. Please think wisely. Use today to put an end to the conflict that has been and the risk of further conflict, worse conflict to come.
Whatever the outcome from today's vote later this evening, the one thing that is certain, one side will not be happy. For Checkpoint, ko Catherine Hutton tēnei.
It's almost 24 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Millions of online digital communications are being preserved to create a snapshot of Aotearoa's response to COVID-19. The National Library and the Alexander Turnbull Library collection includes online posts and donated material. Reporter Eva Corlett was taken behind the scenes to check it out.
Fan art for Ashley Bloomfield, quite a bit of that. Also a fair bit of fan art for the Prime Minister as well.
Valerie Love is a senior digital archivist, and she's giving us an insight into the mood of a nation during a crisis. There's a meme of a dog appearing to wrangle sheep via a Zoom meeting, daily cartoons depicting the shift and change of emotions as the world shuts down, tales of hardship posted to Facebook.
I think one of the things that really struck me was the fact that there was a lot of humour in the online materials and in the social media especially, where people were really looking for a bit of levity and a bit of a way to process a quite serious situation. And that, so there's a lot of joy in the collection as much as it is quite a serious topic. And there's also a lot of openness in the collection. There's a lot of people sharing feelings that maybe they wouldn't have expressed so publicly previously. People talking about, how it feels to, be in lockdown when you're by yourself in a household, or or the connections that they made with family members being suddenly in a small confined space with them for a longer period of time than they might have been otherwise. So there's lots of interesting stories that come through.
Blogs went through a resurgence too.
For the library, that was really exciting because it allowed us to bring in different voices into our collections that might not normally be part of the archival collections here. So with a lot of people who were using social media and who were blogging again, tended to be younger. They tended to be from different backgrounds. So it was really exciting to just see how many people were really interested in sharing their stories because they wanted to build connections. And where the library steps in is that we're able to help preserve those stories. So we have the infrastructure, we have the National Digital Heritage Archive that can ensure that those digital materials are preserved in perpetuity.
That inclusiveness is a major benefit of digital archiving, a bit of a change from the archiving of the past, often reserved for narratives by men or people in positions of power.
This is a World War I soldier's diary that talks about the influenza epidemic. Saturday, the 16th of November, 1918, there's a note here about someone dying in hospital of influenza.
A newspaper clipping from the 1918 influenza crisis, however, is eerily current.
It describes the symptoms of influenza and includes instructions not to congregate in ill-ventilated buildings and discusses household spread. So you can see that something like that is quite relevant to today's pandemic as well.
Valerie Love says the digital archive will give future generations the chance to learn from and connect with this moment.
This collection really shows, it really is sort of a sliver in time. So it shows how people were living during a unique, quite extraordinary experience, and also reflects some of the changes. So there's a lot of times where people would talk about what they would have been doing on any given day or where they would have been. And so that offers a really unique picture of what this year was like.
Up the road in a light-filled studio off Willis Street, I meet with artist Sam Orchard.
When we shifted from level 4 to level 3, I feel like that was the big thing that everyone talked about. There wasn't much difference between that shift. And so this was a comic about that. So it has me in my house. I still won't go anywhere. Me watching Tiger King. I'll still watch bad TV. Me drawing comics. I'll still draw comics all day long. But now I'll do it while sitting in a kiddie pool full of takeaways.
Sam's comics traverse the issues of lockdown in a diaristic manner. They bring levity and pathos to a stressful situation. But importantly, he also captures and reflects the struggles of being trans or queer during that time.
What I wanted with the Quarantine series was to kind of give a nice hug to other queer people who might be experiencing a hard time and say, oh, we're all here together. Like, a lot of the messages when we talk about that team of 5 million makes us all the same, but when those of us have some sort of differences, it's really important to kind of speak to that, to those smaller differences, and that's what I was trying to do with the Quarantine series.
His comics are now part of Aotearoa's historical canon, held in the library's digital archive.
So it's really cool to see them reaching out to marginalised groups and saying, actually, you're a really important part of New Zealand and your voice is important too, and to feel like we're valued and included is just, amazing.
So how does it feel to have his personal work preserved?
It's quite bizarre that it's like my small comics about like me excited about me being excited to eat junk food is kind of in the National Library. It's like, oh, this shouldn't really fit, but I'm kind of stoked that it does. And it kind of subverts the idea of what's allowed in libraries, which is cool.
You too could have your moments immortalised. The libraries are urging anyone who might have content of interest, from tweets and photos to cartoons and memes, to get in touch with them. E pōneke mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Eva Corlett tēnei.
And you can check out the video version of that story filmed by Sam Rillstone. We'll put it up on our Facebook page. Last word to Kevin. He's summing up most of your views. On the West Indies, we should make an example of them and send them home. They understood the rules, didn't care. If we don't, others will follow and do the same. We're back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Director-General of Health says the West Indies cricket team repeatedly flouted the rules while in managed isolation in Christchurch, despite being warned. 30 homes in Napier have been deemed uninhabitable as safety inspections continue following Monday's storm. The Bus and Coach Association has told an inquest into the death of a child in a Māori bus accident that seatbelts should be compulsory on such roads. And